Okay. I'm ready to go to Bible study. So somebody's going to help stop me about 20 after, okay? So we can do the prayer list. But I want you to turn right now to Luke chapter 11, chapter 12. I'll get it right here in a second. Luke chapter 12. Go to verse 13. Luke 12, verse 13. Okay, let's go ahead and read that passage. 13 through 21. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, as you hear that, you might go back to chapter 12, verse 1. Chapter 12, verse 1 says, "Meanwhile, when a crowd of many thousands had gathered, they were trampling on one another." That's a big crowd, right? Jesus began to speak first to his disciples, and then later he speaks to the crowd. So in that context, a very large crowd, Jesus has been teaching that crowd. A man hollers out, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, all of them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. That's an interesting event in and of itself, isn't it? I mean, there's this really large crowd of people, and Jesus is teaching. As a matter of fact, he was talking about those who stand up for him and acknowledge him, and he even went to the point of saying, "You know what? If you're arrested because of your faith in me, don't worry." Right before this, he said, "Don't worry about how you're going to defend yourselves or what you'll say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you at that time what you should say." And in the midst of that, this guy speaks up. "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, rabbis often found themselves in that situation, in that position. Rabbis would be one that family would go to and say, "Can you help us settle this difference that we have about the inheritance?" But is there something, do you sense Jesus is not impressed by this guy's question? Do you sense it bothers him in some way? What do you think's going on here? I mean, when he says, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? That's not exactly a warm and fuzzy response, is it? What do you think's happening here? Yes, sir?
You said that there were other people that would do that, mediate between us.
Mm-hmm.
And they were obviously elected or brought into that service for their ability.
Well, actually, they would go to the rabbis often.
Well,
And that would be part of the rabbis.
But Jesus isn't part of that.
Right,
And they're asking him to do,
right.
it's like me asking you to sing well, never mind, you're a great singer, so. But it's asking somebody that's not, I wouldn't ever say Jesus is unqualified. I would just say Jesus is on a different mission.
Right, he
His
is.
mission is not
He
to
is.
divide up people.
Although, Steve, a lot of folks called him rabbi.
Yes.
A lot of folks called him
Would
rabbi.
he be able to do that legally for that man?
It's part of what a rabbi would typically do. But do y'all see the problem here in this? Yeah.
Well, the guy's, if Jesus is talking to everybody, the guy's making it all about him.
Yes. Here's Jesus teaching. It would be like on a Sunday morning, okay? Somebody in the congregation standing up and saying, "Hey, pastor, will you tell my brother to give me my part of the inheritance?" Now, that obviously there's a problem with that. The timing of that, the place of that, it's totally off base. You know, that's and Jesus let him know that in pretty certain terms. He let him know that. As a matter of fact, what do you make of him? The next response is, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." That's part of his response to the man's request.
But he's also telling that to the crowd.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. It's like he says, if Tom asked me to, in the congregation, and it's like Jesus would say to Tom, who made me an arbiter between you and your brother, right? And then he says to the whole group, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." Now, he's also making a very strong point to the man who asked the question in saying that to the crowd. He's kind of calling him out in that. So he's looking beyond the question and the inappropriateness of the timing of the question to the guy's heart. He's looking into his heart and seeing what's motivating this man pushing this issue in a very inappropriate time. And what's pushing the issue for this man is greed. You know, a lot of folks in here can probably, you could probably relate, and you've watched families, maybe your own family, struggle over inheritance questions and who gets what and all that, and you kind of can maybe understand this man's angst. We know nothing about this man's situation, but what we do know is that the timing was wrong and inappropriate. And we do know that Jesus apparently looked into that man's heart and saw the motivation was not right. Okay, this was more about greed. So just right off the bat, when you hear Jesus say, "A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions," what goes through your mind?
I have too many shoes.
I have too many shoes.
Well, that's kind of what we've been taught all of our lives.
That's a woman's prerogative.
You've been taught what?
Not to look at worldly goods, not to look at what you've got, but to give.
If you've grown up in the church, if you spent much time in the church, this is a lesson you've heard many, many times, right? Any other thoughts as you hear? Does it cross anybody's mind? That's hard. That's tough.
Not if you've grown up in the church and that's what you believe.
Janet doesn't find it tough at all.
I think it's still hard because the world wants you to get more stuff.
So this is an extremely materialistic, consuming culture.
However, I do know people who go to their grave mad because they felt they were mistreated.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And it's so sad.
It's tragic. It's tragic. She said, "I know people who go to their grave angry because they feel like they've been mistreated in inheritance. Brent?
I disagree that it's not difficult, just because even if you have grown up in the church, and even if you've had the Holy Spirit indwelling you for most of your life, you still have that human nature warring within you, and we live in and to your point, we do live in a culture that is very materialistic and very possessions driven. We may just not necessarily see the difficulty because wealth by absolute standards in humankind is ubiquitous in our culture. I mean, we have the highest standard of living of any culture in human history. And so we may not necessarily see ourselves as possessions driven or materialistic, but perhaps it's something that we struggle with more than we think.
It's one of those things, if you look around at any commercial or any advertisement or even like neighbors that get certain things and everybody starts to get these certain things because it's the new thing. And, sometimes we fight with that inclination. And
when you strive to be content, that takes all that
I
angst away.
totally agree. I totally agree. And I think, and here's the deal. I think all of us are at different places with this. Okay? And I think a good question for each one of us to consider is how much of my life is ruled by my stuff? How much of my life is ruled by money, by possessions, by things? And I think sometimes that's hard to be honest with ourselves about. Because if you compare your own possessions, my possessions, your possessions, if we compare it with Jesus' possessions, he encouraged those who were coming to him to count the cost. He says, I don't have anywhere to lay my head. You really ready to follow me?
Barely had sandals put on his feet.
Yeah. So he tells this parable. And the parable is a very simple parable. You know what a parable is? It's the Greek word parabolo. And balo means to toss, to throw. Para means alongside. And it's basically taking a simple truth that everybody understands and tossing it alongside a spiritual truth so that it makes sense to, the spiritual truth makes sense to us. So he says, after he says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, he tells this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Now let's just hold it right there. So far in this story, anything strike you? Anything sound off base? Anything sound like, well,
He doesn't want to share.
Okay, sharing isn't one of his questions. Yeah?
I've got it all now. I can just be a bum for the rest of my life.
I've got it all. I can just take life easy. Now, yes.
I was telling Jim one time, I don't really read anything in the Bible about retirement. We've retired, it doesn't mean we sit down and stop working.
Right. Well, yeah, but you're right. The follower of Christ, God's never done using us, right? He's never done using us. I will tell you what I think when I see this. I think this sounds exactly like we're taught to think. I think it sounds exactly like we're raised to think in this country, in let me not use the word country, in this culture.
We've arrived.
The culture says, you plan and put it away, and put it away, and put it away. And in a certain point, you take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Okay? Then you get into all kinds of discussions. Well, how much is enough? What do you really need? You can go a long ways with this. As a follower of Jesus, I want you to dissect what this man was thinking. Look at it again. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns, and I'll build bigger barns. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to myself, take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Biblically, as a follower of Jesus, do you see an issue with what he's thinking and how he's going about it?
He's not asking God.
There is no discussion with God. There's no thought, God, what do you want me to do with this? What do there's no thought of God's blessing. I mean, God, you have given me all of this. What would you like me to do with this? So there's no seeking God's direction here. Yes, sir.
I was actually thinking of the parallel between this and what James says in James chapter 4.
Go ahead.
Starting in verse 13, he says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. You don't even know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. For you are like smoke that appears for a little while, then vanishes. Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So it is a sin for the person who knows to do what is good and doesn't do it."
James could actually be talking to this man in this parable, right? He's boasting. He's proud. It's a great connection. Anything else catch your... Yes?
I've read the scripture through several times on my journey halfway through the Bible. But I never understood why the man was going to tear down the barns that he had. Why didn't he just build more barns and leave those full?
I thought
It's a matter of a point, and it's hang on. The simple point is he didn't have barns to contain all that he had. So whether he built new barns or whether he tore down, I mean, the point is he's making room for all he has. That's the point of it.
I understand.
Nothing else. That's just the point of it right there. So, anybody noticing what shall I do? It's my crops, my barns.
It's me.
Yes, it's all me. It's all mine. And what's the Bible teach us?
It's all his.
It's God.
It's all his. It's all from him. And every good gift we have is from him, right? I do believe James also said that in James 1. Every good gift comes from the Father above. I think about King David when just an incredible amount of money and silver and gold and all the materials needed to build the temple that his son Solomon was going to build, and he dedicated it, and he so clearly made it evident that God, this is all from you. Everything we're giving you is from you. We're just giving you what belongs to you. And I think that is where our real challenge is. I think the challenge we have is to look at, we are fully understanding our salvations from God. And we thank God all the time for his son Jesus and all that he means to us. We fully understand this Bible's a gift from God. Relationships, friendships, family, gift from God. We understand all of that. That is not even difficult to comprehend. But I think where we really struggle, and I think it's a great deal because of the culture in which we live, that pushes us to consume, and happiness and joy is found in consuming. You know, that new car is going to make you happy. That new computer is going to it's going to be a joy in your life. And we stop and think about stuff like that. You know, I get that special cologne. Some young guy gets that special cologne, and he's going to draw the ladies because of that cologne. I mean, that the world is just foolish. It has no concept of what true joy is. And I think our challenge, and I'm including me in this, our challenge is to look at everything we have materially, financially, as a gift from God, belonging to God, on loan to us. On loan to us to use as God sees fit, and as we prayerfully seek his guidance and direction on how he would have us use it. Our homes. You know, how often do you think about your home being God's? God's gift to you, how you use it and what you do with it. The vehicles that you drive. The money in the bank. Do you stop and really think that all of that is from God? Yes, my salvation's from God. My relationship with Jesus is from God. And we let Jesus guide us in all these other things. We want him to guide us in our relationships. We want him to guide us in our career moves. We want him to guide us in educational pursuits. But do we want him to guide us in financial decisions? Do we want him to be the one we turn to with everything he's given us? Because when it comes to material things, I think a lot of us tend to get where this guy is. And this guy's saying, this is mine because I earned it. I'm the one that made this happen. Do you see a fallacy in that kind of thinking?
God even gave him his health to grow it.
God gave him everything to make it possible, right? His mind, his abilities.
Good ground.
Yes, the place, I mean, yeah, he gave him everything. And we can't forget that. Anything we've accomplished in our careers, he gave us the ability to do it. He opened the doors for us to do it. Okay? Any thought about that? Any question? Yes, sir.
It seems to me that one of the other errors here is he's trusts what he's got. That's what he's trusts. He doesn't trust.
You're right.
It's like me trusting in my 401k.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I think those are things we sometimes have to learn the hard way. Yeah, that's a scary thing when you trust your 401k. No, that's the things we have to learn the hard way. Too often, you know. I've spent 50 years running, jogging, thinking, well, this will help my heart. This will be good for my health. At any point along the way, something can happen. You know, I mean, I'm doing what I can to be able to use what God's given me and stay healthy and be able to do those things. But you can trust in your health, and your health be gone just like that. Had a wonderful friend who, the guy didn't drink anything but water, and he ran ultra marathons and died at 40 because of melanoma cancer. Left behind a wife and 2 kids. You can trust in that account. Till World War III breaks out and everything goes to pot, and there we go. We don't have anything. You know what I'm saying? We can trust in things, but the ultimate place to place trust is in God. So Proverbs talks about a fool. Who's a fool? Okay, let me share some Proverbs from that talk about fool. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. That's Proverbs 1:7. Proverbs 1:22 says, fools hate knowledge. Proverbs 10:18 says, whoever spreads slander is a fool. Proverbs 14:9, fools mock at making amends for sin. In other words, fools make fun of someone going to somebody else and say, I'm so sorry I hurt you. Will you please forgive me? They think that's weakness. He's happy. Proverbs 20 verse 3, every fool is quick to quarrel. I'll tell you what, there's a lot Proverbs says about fools, isn't it? Proverbs 21:20, in the house of the wise are the stores of food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has. So here's a proverb that speaks to the necessity and the truth of being careful with what you do with your finances. Maybe this guy would claim that proverb and say, hey, that's me. Except the wise are seeking God's wisdom, right? And this man's not seeking God's wisdom at all. Proverbs 26:11, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. To do the same thing over and over and fall short. Proverbs 28:26, he who trusts in himself is a fool. How many of us were taught from the time we were knee-high to a grasshopper? Pull your bootstraps up, you take care of yourself. Be independent. And yet, God's word says, you depend on me, on the Lord. Proverbs 29:11, a fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. I do believe James 1:19 says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. So, I don't think I would ever want God to call me a fool. And yet, when this man says, this is what I'll do, I'll tear down my barns, I'll build bigger ones, I will store all of my grain and my goods, and I'll say to myself, take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry, because you've got plenty of good things laid up for many years. And God said, you fool. Several of the very proverb examples that we read are pointing back to a guy like this. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you prepared for yourself? Kind of interesting. He brings it right back to the guy's question, right? Tell my brother to divide my inheritance with me. Oh, any thought? Anything catch your attention there? In all that? It's a wonderful lesson. It's a wonderful lesson. And I think it's one that really challenges us. So,
I think the last part, that whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God, it's like you can have some stuff, you just can't overtake your life, so you lose your focus on God.
Yeah.
What strikes me is he never offered to give to the poor.
He didn't offer anything but take care of himself.
To the poor and make life easier for other people.
So let's look at that verse 21. This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself. I think that's a direct challenge to every single one of us to think about what we have and what we're doing with it and how we're viewing it and if we're talking to God about it at all. Okay? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich toward God. The question is, what does it mean to be rich toward God? How would you explain that, describe that? Any thought?
Have a conversation with him as you live your day.
So we're talking with him about everything, but specifically here in the context we're talking about, we're talking with him about his will for
And what we do,
our lives, what we do.
what we buy, what we sell, what we give to, who we help.
Yeah, because here he's very specifically talking about being rich toward God in this context directly with our possessions, our things, our stuff, our money.
God tell me
I
what
think-
you want me to do with it.
Yeah. So praying, both of you are saying, really seeking God's heart. He is our chief financial advisor.
I mean, to me, if you're rich, you have stuff. If you're rich in God, then you have His comfort, you have His peace of heart, you have His love, and you know that you have these things.
Yeah.
It's-
With the riches God gives us,
Contentment.
for some of us, it might be possessions and things like that. I mean, good grief, David, Solomon, Saul, Abraham. I mean, all of those Old Testament saints were loaded. Okay, and really held accountable for what they did with it. I think most of us we let ourselves off the hook. We're not rich. But we are, yes. But we tell ourselves we're not rich. Until you look at what's going on in Haiti right now. Until you walk through the streets of St. Albans, Charleston, Dunbar, any city, and you see how many people are on the streets. We're rich. So go a little bit further if you can. What is it to be rich toward God? Anything else come to mind?
You have to be sort of rich to really trust that and count on it to get you through everything in life. People that don't have as much maybe are more likely. Maybe it's a warning about having too much stuff.
Well, I think one of the things, Jesus made a statement, and I'm paraphrasing here. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to find the kingdom of heaven, to be saved, to be in right relationship with God. And that sounds pretty harsh. And a lot of people have tried to downplay that and say the eye of the camel was a smaller gate going into Jerusalem that the camel kind of had to bend down and lower his neck, and that doesn't cut it. He's literally talking about a camel going through the eye of a needle. Ain't going to happen. Right? It's impossible. And one of the struggles, but this can happen to any of us, is that we're so comfortable or dependent upon the life we have created with our stuff and our things and doing things our way that we don't see a need for God. We just don't see a need. We've got it covered. Got a wonderful house, have wonderful vehicles, have plenty of financial security, kids going to the best schools, and just going on and on. We've got it all covered.
That sounds like a nightmare.
And we can tend to think we've created it. We've made it happen. Now, I'm not saying any of those things is bad in and of themselves. I think what Jesus is saying, it's easy to become self-reliant rather than God-reliant. When everything's taken care of, what do you need God for? That's kind of the process where we get in our thinking. I've got this. Okay? I don't need anything. I don't need anything from anybody. I've got it covered. I've got my career. I've got my house. I've got my family. I've got my money. I've got my vehicles. Everything is going just the way I want it to go.
You fool.
That's exactly right. You fool.
Maybe you should think of it as how easy it could all be gone.
It can all be gone very
How
easy.
quick and
His
how
life
easy
was
it could,
dependent of him that night.
maybe if you keep that in mind.
Yeah. Well, I've been reminded, it's about 20 after here. It's really interesting. Let me just read it, and then we'll go to the prayer list. Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you're going to eat, about your body, what you will wear. Life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens." Okay, he's in a different spot. This isn't the same place and location where he was doing this before. Because that was a Sermon on the Mount. Okay, consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? And this is a little different twist from when he said on the Sermon on the Mount. Since you can't do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? You know what he's saying? I mean, you can't even give yourself an extra hour of life. So why do you worry about this stuff? So consider how the lilies grow. They don't labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. Went to Pastor John's borrowing a vehicle of Mary's, and we went to pick it up yesterday, and there she had, wrapped up in a wet paper towel. What are those called? Daffodils and hyacinths. Beautiful. Beautiful. Now, she didn't say they were for me. She said, you take these to Debbie, okay? And they were beautiful. I mean, none of us can dress that good and look that good. And it does smell good. Yes, absolutely. So not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And in that day and time, see, this is hard for us to understand. In that day and time, food each day, clothing each day, it wasn't like they had a closet they went to with all the shoes and with all the bells and with all the tops and with all the... They didn't have that, right? So they actually get concerned about it. Don't set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Don't worry about it. The world around us, he says, the pagan world, the world around us runs after all such things. And we see it in all the consumerism and the advertisement and the marketing. And your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions. Oh, it's a whole other story. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A lot to think about.